So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you probably remembered when I did the PowerMac G5 modification, which I ended up calling the Mako. The whole point behind that video was to prove that I could custom build a gaming/graphics PC that would perform as well as or better than Apple's new PowerMac and cost significantly less. That series of videos was a huge hit and they have racked up thousands of views on my YouTube channel. The idea was to motivate young people all over to get creative during the pandemic and also to reuse older hardware that is still in good condition instead of tossing it into a landfill. What you probably didn't know is that I had acquired another old G5 case and I was supposed to do another mod with a different design. It took me about 2 years to get the Mako done because I was so busy with other stuff, but behind the scenes I was designing and slowly putting together the second mod. Now the Mako build was quite extensive and I really went into great detail to show how I did every step. But I'm not going to do that here. In this much shorter video, I'm going to show what I did differently. Now as much as I love the front panel connections provided by the Laser Hive, they are a bit pricey and I wanted to make some changes. I needed some more USB connections up front and I also needed a dedicated memory card reader. That's why I decided to go with these two devices. But in order to use those devices, I needed to figure out two things, the mounting and the aesthetics. The G5 case is not your standard ATX case, so adding standard components requires special mounting. So how did I fix that? Honestly, it took me a while to figure out the mounting, but initially my concern was primarily on the aesthetics. Cutting the front of the G5 case to mount components would create some sharp edges that would not look very elegant. My solution to that was to jump onto my laptop and design some faceplates in PowerPoint. Initially, the idea was to spray paint these faceplates to hide the edges of the areas I had cut on the case. Now, oftentimes I hear kids say stuff like, "Why do I have to study geometry? When am I going to use that?" Here's a situation where geometry came in handy. I was able to take the measurements and draw my own design, instead of paying someone to help me design and draw my faceplates. On this faceplate that would go over the memory card reader, I drew it with sharp corners, but when I sent the design to West Palm Beach Plastics to be manufactured, I requested rounded corners. Unlike the Mako design where I taped off part of the computer and spray painted the other part, in this design I took the entire case apart. That's something I would probably not do again. Too much work, and it's definitely not worth the effort because no one is going to see the inside of the PC. I guess that would only be important if you had a huge window on the side and you wanted to show off your color scheme. The other mistake I made was painting the power supply, but then I guess there was some benefit to that. Now going back to the faceplates, I needed to figure out a way to keep them secured to the case. To do that, I made use of the tiny holes in the G5's case. First, I lined up the plate, then I marked a few screw holes using the openings on the case. After marking the screw holes, I drilled them out a little bit. Then with a soldering iron, I pressed some knurled nuts in that the corresponding screws would hold to. Of course, at every step along the way, I would stop and test everything to make sure that the build was going just fine and that I wouldn't have any problems later on. Unfortunately, some of the holes I drilled didn't line up perfectly, but to fix that, I just used my soldering gun to press some screws directly into the acrylic. Since the screws were not going to appear on the other side, but rather they would just go partially into the acrylic, then that needed to work perfectly, hence the use of the soldering iron. At this stage, I needed to figure out how to mount the audio panel and card reader, so I went back up my computer and designed solutions using Microsoft PowerPoint. This is what I came up with for the audio panel, which is basically an acrylic block with a 1/4-inch groove in it. Now, you're probably wondering why I'm using clear acrylic. Given how much light travels through the G5 case, especially with a grill up front, if I had something that was opaque that would block the light, then that would create a shadow. So by having the acrylic, I was able to keep the light bouncing around and exiting the computer, thus keeping the aesthetics. The next part is for mounting the card reader and was a bit more complex. Fortunately for me, Fabrice at West Palm Beach Plastics was able to help me fabricate the parts based on my design. Here you can see me measuring up everything just to make sure that the fit was right. But going back to the audio panel, the acrylic mount for that needed the groove because it needed to fit over the LED strip. After that, I drilled some starter holes, put a screw in, and then used my solder gun to push the screw in for a tight fit. As soon as the screw was all the way in, I removed the solder gun and used a cold screwdriver to hold the screw in place until the acrylic cooled. As the acrylic hardens, it creates a natural screw thread, and since the acrylic shrinks, it doesn't stick permanently to the screw. To secure the mount for the card reader, I just use an epoxy compound to glue it to the top of the case. After leaving the epoxy to cure overnight, I was able to add the card reader and use a single screw and a wing nut to secure it in place. After that, all I had to do was make the connections. The final step was to add stickers to the case to hide the tiny imperfections in the paint job. At the bottom of the case, I have furniture pads to allow someone to move the PC easily without scratching the floor. So one of the things that could potentially happen since I'm using stickers is that the stickers could get marked with a pen or a marker, or they could get smudged or scratched when someone is moving the computer. And so to avoid that, I use a clear coat nail polish. I don't recommend any specific brand, but any nail polish that's a clear coat that will protect it. And when you apply it, just apply it generously and don't wait too long to complete the entire sticker, because it starts to dry right away, and you don't want part of it to dry and then apply more, because then it's going to look smudged and ugly. One of the things I mentioned in the Mako build that I corrected here was a huge space between the motherboard and case. I used some pink foamy to solve that by gluing several strips together. I have to admit though that it could have been neater. Here's a finished product. If you need links to the items I used in the video, check them out in the description below. I know the hardware I use is 3 years old, but given hardware prices these days, you can still build a decent gaming graphics PC with this hardware. Or you could use the latest CPU versions with a different memory combination to get better performance. I'll post some suggestions in the description below so that you can check those out and figure out which one is best for you. But for now, until my next video, bye.